Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to like it, share it, follow the show, give it a big fat review. You can also find the show on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates and upcoming guests. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram at Chicopee. Check out their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or check out MetroJeep.com and make it Metro. Then drive home in your new Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram today.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
So here's a little history lesson for you. Let's assume that rock and roll began in 1954 when somebody decided to give it a name. And let's assume that person was the late Alan Freed. Alan Freed gets credit for calling it something, but it certainly wasn't Alan Freed who discovered it. If you really wanted to get into where it all originated, then you probably have to go all the way back to the 1860s with the earliest versions of blues and gospel, which originated in the American Deep South. Or maybe you prefer to leap forward to 1912 when jazz was gaining popularity. Or maybe even a decade later when country western was starting to develop. Or maybe you prefer to start 20 years after that when some of these styles were merging together to form rhythm and blues. 1954 sounds like a pretty good starting point, but then that ignores what came directly before that and the earliest parts of the 1950s, before Alan Freed. The music was called a lot of different things, but one thing that stuck was the name Rockabilly. And that, my friends, is where this story begins. The earliest parts of the 1950s is where you find all these musical forms merging together, starting perhaps with Bill Haley and the Comets from 1951 with the single Rocket 88. From there, the earliest rock and roll records were, in fact, rockabilly. Everything from Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, all rockabilly. And it would stay that way for the next several years until the end of the decade, when things happen like Elvis goes into the Army or Buddy Holly dies in a plane crash, and when radio starts to change its focus to a more chart-driven playlist. But those early records influenced everything, not just here in America, but also in Great Britain as well, which saw a resurgence in rockabilly in the 1970s. Once the music of Sun Records and several others became available overseas, and while punk was starting to spread, there was a movement in which kids went back and embraced some of those early singles, much of which would go on to influence Dave Edmunds, Nick Lowe, Chris Spedding, and many others. Suddenly, rockabilly was back, and not ironically, rockabilly also had a resurgence here in the U.S. in the early 80s. And throughout the years, rockabilly has had a major influence on bands like X, The Cramps, The Blasters, Robert Gordon, The Stray Cats, Reverend Horton Heat, and hundreds of others. And it continues to this day. In other words, the building blocks of rock and roll are still very much alive. One of the most respected champions of rockabilly is guitarist, songwriter, and producer Danny B. Harvey. For the last several decades, Danny has become one of the most important forces in rockabilly, having played with or produced music with Johnny Ramone, Wanda Jackson, Nancy Sinatra, both Lee Rocker and Slim Jim Phantom from the Stray Cats. Also remember the Rockats with Levi Dexter in the early 80s, and then with the Ripchords. Also involved in a great three-piece band called the Headcat with Slim Jim Phantom and the late Lemmy from Motörhead. And he's still doing it today. His latest band, No Class, with Corey Parks from Nashville Pussy and Die Huns, along with Aaron Black from The Scorpions' Child, makes their debut this March. And as always, it'll be fun to see where Danny takes it. So for anyone who tries to tell you that rock and roll is dead, ignore that. Because where there are still guitars and people who play them, somebody is always going to rediscover rockabilly. To talk about that is my guest today, rockabilly legend Danny B. Harvey, on Baxie's Musical Podcast. I don't know if it's, one of these things that gets passed into your DNA or whatever. I remember my mom and dad being big fans of what would now be considered oldies. I mean, it's kind of a dismissive way of putting it, but it was early rock and roll and it was nostalgic. And I always thought it was interesting that, there's this strange perception that rockabilly and early rock and roll goes through these revivals every couple of years, like it's a nostalgic throwback. But the truth is, it's never really ever gone away. It's not really about revival. It's about survival. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Well, I agree 100%. Yeah, so when I first started doing the Rockabilly revival thing, it was I thought it was all new, it was all coming back again, but then I realized we knew it was about in the 50s and early 60s, but there's band like Sean Anon and stuff that played, at Woodstock, and there's also big bands like Deep Purple and stuff that their live sets would have them doing 50s covers, like even like Led Zeppelin and all the bands I really liked, they would do encores and do these old 50s songs.
I mean, you grew up, primarily in rural Kentucky. You moved out of Texas. You got there as a young kid.
Texas and Kentucky, yeah.
Yeah, you start playing guitar around the age of 13, and by 17, you're already playing professionally. Tell me about that and how you started playing and how you progressed so much in just 4 years.
Well, I was living in Catlettsburg, Kentucky at the time, and I learned to play guitar from my neighbor, but he didn't give me proper lessons. He went over and he had a bunch of really cool guitars, and he was older. I was 13. He's probably 16 or 17, and he sat down and he played Purple Haze on the guitar, and I told him I really wanted to learn Purple Haze. So the first song I learned was Purple Haze. He taught it to me. And so then like 3 months later, I joined a band, but I started out by learning Purple Haze, learning Led Zeppelin. I went straight into learning really advanced songs, and which was a great way to get good really fast.
I've heard you talk about the music that you were influenced as a kid, all this rock stuff. But when it came to guitar, you eventually started to gravitate toward things like, blues and country and jazz. What was it about those styles of music that made you want to pursue them? Was it about the challenge of playing it, or was it about something more?
Well, I started playing country because when I lived in Catlettsburg, I became so good at the guitar that I became the best guitarist in town. Catlettsburg had a population of 1,200 people at the time. So I was the best guitarist in town by the time I was 14. So all the old country guys would ask me to play guitar. So I had to learn country, and all the rock bands, which was about all three of them, asked me to play guitar. So then I moved into Ashland. I'd go to Ashland, Kentucky, and play bigger places. But I was still under 16. At 16, we moved to California, about 40 miles north of LA, in a horse community. So it was really rural, but I was 40 minutes away from Hollywood. And so from there, I got into jazz, and I went to go down and see all these players play down at like the Baked Potato and these jazz clubs. When I was 17, I started going to these clubs, maybe 16. And I was also starting to play in rock bands that were making money, and with country artists who are making money. So it's all like moving to California, everything changed. I was so close to everything, but at the same time living near horse ranch.
So I would imagine that because you moved to a rural part of the state, that it probably wasn't the kind of stark transition you would expect from going from Kentucky to downtown Los Angeles. It was probably a bit of a smoother transition for you at that age.
Yeah, and it was because they're so close to everything, and I also, when I arrived in California, I was actually very, very good on the guitar. So I was one of the best guitarists in Santa Clarita, California, which is now it's a big country. Big city at the time. Santa Clarita is Valencia, Newhall, Canyon country. But back then, there's mainly horse community.
Oh, I want to ask you. I read that you had studied under Joe Pass, who is, for people who don't know, one of the really great jazz guitarists ever.
That was like a really lucky thing, and because I started taking jazz when I started playing. I got so into jazz, I went and took some improv lessons at College of the Canyons while I was in high school. And College of the Canyons had just opened, it's community college, but there wasn't a lot of people out there. So they let high school students, anyone could sign up for community college. So I took a jazz improv class with this guy named Stu Fisher and Bob Downs, and they were like session guys, but they would, because the class was so small, they would invite their friends to come in and like jam. So one of the friends they brought in was Joe Pass. So Joe Pass sat with me in the guitar, in the guitar section. In the way the improv class, everyone that was playing in the band, all the horns, the piano player, the guitar, they go through every person and they play a solo over some song they pick. And I noticed that one day someone would come by, and why I'd be playing rhythm behind him, Joe Pass would say things like, "You don't need to play those big chords. You can play these kind of chords when you comp." And he'd show me stuff behind him. And then when the solo would come before it became time for him to do solo. He'd say something like, "What I'm going to do in this solo," and he just give me advice, and then he would do it. I told him one time, "Wow, I learned so much when you're here." And he said, "Well, here's my phone number. If I'm in town, you can come down in the afternoon. I live down in Reseda, and hang out, and I'll give you lessons at the house." That's kind of what happened. I couldn't believe it, because Joe Pass had just done the Virtuoso album, and among jazz guitarists, he was at that point, everyone thought he was like the best.
He was unbelievable. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to learn from a guy like that. Such a wealth of talent and knowledge, but then to have a guy who's so versed in improvisation. I mean, that had to be really impactful for a young kid playing guitar for just a couple of years.
It was amazing. I couldn't believe that he was teaching me. And I go down there, and the first thing he'd do, the cool thing is, I go to his house. His wife would bring us iced tea, and we'd sit around there. I get my guitar out, and he would play records for me. And he'd go, "Don't listen to the guitar player. Listen to the sax player. Listen the way what he's playing there. He's not playing like just riffs. He's making sounds." Or tell me different. He point out there, listen to the piano player. Listen what he's playing. He's not playing like the pentatonic scale or the things I knew. And then we'd pick up the guitars, and he would actually show me with his fingers what he'd been talking about and what he was listening to. And it made me look at things a whole different way. It made me look at the way I play music instead of scales and things like that. He didn't really play scales. Whereas people like John McLaughlin, other people where I was studying, they had scale books. I remember I had a book once that said 1,001 scales to play on the guitar. Joe Pass didn't play any scales at all.
Yeah.
He played everything based on the chord and based on what he heard in his head. And where he would want to go from. He says, "You want to go from one note to another note, and what you do in between isn't all that important. It's where you start and where you end."
It's amazing. I'll find myself sometimes, watching YouTube or TikTok videos of guitarists or drummers or whatever, and I'm always amazed by how easily people will dismiss some of the talent that was in country music or in jazz. I mean, I like this week I was watching some videos of just Roy Clark playing.
He's just amazing.
Amazing, and you think of well, that's the guy from Hee Haw. How good could he possibly be? But, for every Yngwie Malmsteen that's out there, there's a half dozen country blues or jazz guys that could blow that guy off the stage. I mean, just possibly brilliant talent in country. And I think, as a young guitar player, I think it's really wise to be able to look at some of those other genres and music styles and realize, hey, there's a hell of a lot more than just shredding Van Halen songs. I mean, there's a lot more to learn.
Yeah, it's like those country guys, especially the early country guys, they seem to all be like really into jazz and stuff. The early country, like you go back to Bob Wills and stuff, and even some of the old country guys, on those old records, they were doing jazz stuff because that's what they would learn. There was no real set, until the 60s, there's no real set bending the strings and getting like a James Burton type sounds and, having a twangy guitar. Before that, they had these big hollow body guitars, and they would just do a lot of jazz runs.
So with all that experience and all that exposure that you've had to all these multiple styles, what was it about rockabilly and early rock that continued to resonate with you?
Well, then, like I said, so I'd been playing rock and roll. I started playing rock and roll, like Led Zeppelin and all that. So there's a lot of blues that Jimmy Page is playing, and Hendrix. I learned all this stuff. And then I got into the blues. I got to B.B. King and Albert Lee. Albert King. But then I really was in Freddie King. I started trying to learn how to play finger picks. Then when I saw Freddie King, but then I got into jazz. But then I discovered rockabilly, and the thing I found about rockabilly is when you listen, what they called rockabilly, it'd be all these different like country artists or people raised in the country doing like really frantic songs. Some of the musicians they'd hire, they played jazz leads. Some of them would play blues leads, and some would play these really aggressive, like Chuck Berry double stop stuff. And I realized, like, wow, everything I've learned, I can play in the genre of rockabilly. Even in the same song, I can do a Joe Pass jazz lead, and then I can go to a blues lead, and then I can go to, like a Chuck Berry double stop kind of solo, and it all fit rockabilly.
You're coming into this at a great time, like in the late '70s, early '80s, when you're in Los Angeles and California. Punk is starting to emerge at that time, but there's all these bands in the punk umbrella that are also reaching back to
Right.
rockabilly. I mean, everything from the X, the Cramps, the Blasters, the Gun Club, even the Ramones in a lot of ways. I mean, they were really kind of playing 50 style rock songs, in
Right.
1977. How did you work your way into that scene? I mean, obviously, it's pretty well established. How do you get involved in some of that?
One thing at that time I was going down, I was going to the Palomino, and I was playing in the Palomino house band, so I really knew country music pretty well, and I was doing well. I got to play with Johnny Paycheck, and I got to play with I was playing with Elvis impersonators too. And the cool thing is, I met this one Elvis impersonator named Michael Kidd, and he he's the one that turned me on to rockabilly because he would do the early Elvis because he was younger and he wasn't heavy set, and he'd try to do the Vegas Elvis. So we would do Elvis rockabilly songs. And I asked him one time, I said, "What is that kind of music?" And he goes, "That's rockabilly." Because his Elvis impersonator told me, "You should listen to Gene Vincent and Johnny Burnett if you like this." So I went down to Tower Records in Hollywood and got the Solid Smoke record of Johnny Burnett. I got the Pop Can't Stop record by Gene Vincent, and then I heard Cliff Gallup, and that blew my mind. Like, because Cliff Gallup was doing what I was trying to do, fast jazz runs and this really fast, frantic guitar playing. But then I was going down to see rock. Anytime there's a Rockaway band play, I'd go see them. And at that time, there was only Ray Campy, and Ray Campy had a little afro then, and he played it a little bit, but it was kind of, he wore polyester shirts. And everyone said there's a band from England called Levi and the Rockats. This is about 78. And so I went down to the Whiskey to see them, and they were exactly what I wanted to be. They were probably 18 at the time, and I was 17. And they had Levi had blue hair, and the Gibbs had bleached his hair out platinum. Buddy was all tattooed, which no one was back then. And they jump around the stage, and their audience is made up of mainly punks because there wasn't a rockabilly scene. So all the punks thought they embraced them like a punk band. So they were opening for X and opening for the Clash. Sorry, opening for the Cramps. They hadn't opened for the Clash yet. We did later, but so I met them, and there everything changed.
Yeah. It's funny when we're making arrangements for the interview. Tex Mosley contacted me, and he asked me if I had heard of Levi and the Rockats, and the first time I had become even remotely aware of them is when I was preparing to talk to John Baz of the Blasters, and it's like one of those things where all of a sudden Spotify is blasting out things that you might like, and I'm listening to it. I'm going, oh my God, this is so fantastic. How did you start playing with them? I mean, obviously you saw them and like what they were doing, but at what point do you start playing along with them?
Well, it's funny. Like, I was in the house band at the Palomino, and after I seen Levi and the Rockats, I went out and got a haircut, and I was bought rockabilly clothes, and I was going to the shows and stuff, and I didn't really know them. But one time I went to Palomino, and I went there, and Levi and the Rockats were playing. It was 1979. I think it was like the beginning of 1979. And it was sold out. So to get in, I had to walk in through the band's entrance in the back through the dressing room. So I walked in and right away ran into Lee Childers, their manager, and he went and he saw I was a young guy with blonde quiff, and he introduced himself and said, "I managed Levi and the Rockats." And he said, and I said, "Oh, I'm a big fan of theirs. I'm in house band here." So he took me backstage and introduced me to Levi and Spuddy. And from then on, whenever I go to their shows, I would hang out with them. And Levi would hang out with me and talk to me about, like, wow, man, you're the real thing. You play with Johnny Paycheck, and you play with all these people that he idolized, thought they were big country stars. And so I remember Christmas Day, 1979, I went down to the Starwood to see them play. I walk in, and Dibs and Smutty are outside, and they go, "We fired Levi from the Rockats today, and we're going to continue as the Rockats. Do you want to join and be our guitar player? And Dibs is going to be our singer." And I went, "Oh yeah, that'd be great." Then I go up to the dressing room, and Levi's there, and Levi goes, "I quit the Rockats today, and I want to put a new band together and go to England. You want to start a band with me?" And I went, "Well, that sounds like a better deal, so I'll do that." And that's what happened. I turned down the Rockats, joined Levi, went to London, but every time I would run into them, they were all still friends. Smutty would pull me aside and go, "When are you going to quit the Rock? When are you going to quit Levi and join the Rockats?" And they kept telling me that for 2 years. And finally, well, about a year and a half. One time I'm having Tim Scott was their guitarist. He didn't really want to be the guitarist because he's from a band called the Decks, and he wanted to be a solo artist. So I had lunch with him in Hollywood when he said, "I want to quit the Rockats, but he told me I can only quit if I get you to join." At that time, I was kind of sick of living in London, so I went, "Okay, tell him I'll join." So I mailed a letter to Levi because there's no way I couldn't afford to call England back then, and told him I wasn't coming back to London. I was quitting, and I joined the Rockats. So I was Levi, then I was with the Rockats. But it was a 2-year delay because they'd asked me to join on Christmas Day, and I joined them. My first show with them was 2 weeks before Christmas in 1981. So it took about slightly less than 2 years for me to join them.
So you were with the Rockats for quite a while.
Yeah.
You recorded. You had record companies involved. You recorded a couple things. Tell me about the name change to the Secret Hearts. Tell me about how that happened.
That was when we kind of broke up after that. We did some reunions, but yeah, we were managed by everything. We were on RCA. We put a record out, and it did really well. It was getting heavy rotation on MTV, and we were doing all kinds of great shows. We went on tour opening for The Clash. We opened for David Bowie on some shows on the Let's Dance tour. The Hall & Oates took us out for their Man-Eater tour for like 40 shows. We opened for Kiss. When we opened for Kiss at the Palladium in New York, everyone liked us to open. So we were doing really well. We were on American Bandstand, and we've done a movie called Where the Boys Are. Then Tommy Mottola stepped in. At that time, he's probably the biggest manager in the world because he's managing Hall & Oates, he's managing Carly Simon and John Cougar, and he wanted to be our manager. And we couldn't believe it. Now it was going to be big time. So we signed with him. But his first thing he did was convince us we needed to change our name.
And he said, what was his justification for wanting to do that?
He said because the Rockats had a stigma because Levi and Rockats have been around since '77, and we've been around since the Rockats have been around since 1980. It was now 1983. He goes, in this industry, man, you have to make people think, you've been around now, so people are kind of weary. Like if people are saying you've been around too long and you haven't had a hit record and you haven't really, done it. So we're going to give you a new start, and I'm going to get you signed to MCA. And I remember Tommy sitting in a room with us, and Tommy said, if this record doesn't go top 10 and you don't have a hit record, we should all get out of this business. That's what he told us. Now, he didn't, obviously.
No, he didn't.
He became the president of Sony. But I remember him saying that. And so what they did is Irving A's all signed us. We were the first band he signed it, and they signed us for a gigantic record deal. We went into 30 days lockout at Electric Ladyland in New York. So it's the big time, We did the record. And it came out, and I remember they even had this guy, the guy who wrote for Pablo Cruz, was it one of these bands? This guy was a songwriter. He was they had a guy write a song for a band. That's the song Moment of Madness. And he was a big, successful songwriter. They said they need to guarantee a hit. And we got David Sanborn to play sax on it. And we did everything on that record. So it was all supposed to be a gigantic thing. Then they did a marketing research thing. I remember the guy who works with Champion Entertainment had a meeting with him because, we did some marketing research and they figured out the album can't break the top 25 or something, and it won't make money for them. And I said, why didn't they spend the money on taking out ads? Why did they spend money on marketing research? And they said, so they're gonna shelf this album, and we'll see. You have a 2-album deal, so then we'll figure out. We'll try to get better songs for the next album. That'd be your last chance.
I mean, it sounds like they kind of screwed themselves as they were busy screwing you.
And the fun thing is, we made the big thing. We had the Rockats They didn't. We could go out at that time. Our minimum was 2,000 a year, 2,000 a show, and we could play. We played over 200 shows a year. We could go play anywhere in the country. We could tour constantly. We wanted, and the big places that would sell out. And so we had a great name as Rockats. We did this big farewell show at the Ritz. It's the last bop, we called it, and we changed it. We're going to be the Secret Hearts now. So now we're sitting there. We can't play as the Secret Hearts. We can't go back to being Rockats because Tommy Mottola is still our manager, and we're still signed to MCA as the Secret Hearts. So we kind of just sat there until Dibs and Smutty couldn't. Dibs had to go get a job, and his girlfriend broke up with him. His girlfriend's a model, and she had nowhere to live, so he moved back to London. And Smutty moved to. He worked. I think he moved. We worked on a ranch in New Mexico or somewhere. Well, then they didn't have their H-1 visas anymore, so they couldn't go in and out of the country at will. So long story short, the band just kind of fell apart, and then Tommy dropped us. So
he was off the Christmas list.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
You mentioned that you had spent some time in England, and I was just watching a documentary about rockabilly and the revival that did happen in Great Britain with rockabilly and early rock and roll. A few months ago, I interviewed Chris Spedding, and we talked a lot about that and the influence of blues and how it presented itself in the UK, and I know that he was a big influence on you. Especially the stuff he did with Robert Gordon, which is absolutely amazing stuff. Tell me a little bit about Spedding and your relationship with him.
Well, ironically, the funny thing about Chris Spedding was because I was into jazz and I was into progressive rock and stuff like that. And I was actually listening a lot to like Roxy Music and the Gong and bands like that. And all the time there'd be these weird compilations that come out. Like one was one was Peter and the Wolf version done by all these English like progressive rock musicians. And Chris Spedding was the duck in that. He made duck sound. He was the duck one. And then I got into Chris Spedding. He also did an album with Brian Eno. He played guitar. He did an album with Kevin Ayers. Playing with John Cale. And I knew all his work in progressive rock. Then I saw. And I never heard of Robert Gordon, but I saw he was playing the Roxy, and it said with Chris Spedding on the ads. And I went, I get to see Chris Spedding live. So I went there not knowing who Robert Gordon was, and saw this guy playing he played a flying V, he had a half Marshall stack. And I went, wow, that's what I want to do. That's how I want to do. He has a Marshall and a flying V, and he's an amazing guitar player. And so that made me really take rockabilly even more serious in the fact it was fun to jam to.
Yeah.
It was actually a really viable musical project that these guitar idols that I was looking up to would join rockabilly bands.
So, I was in early high school when the Stray Cats came out and they started to produce hits. And one of the things that they said in this documentary is, there had been such a scene growing in Great Britain for rockabilly and rock and roll that when the Stray Cats came out, there was almost a little bit of resentment against them. Like, who are these Americans to be playing American music that we love so much? Like,
I was over there living in, because when me and Levi started the Ripchords, Lee Childers brought out Brian Setzer and his brother Gary Setzer, and we had rehearsals for a whole month. And they were in a band called the Tomcats, and they also had a band called the Bloodless Pharaohs. So when we were going to go to London, I remember I drove Brian and Gary to the airport with Levi. We had back then you could go up to the gates and you could hang out with the people until they got on the plane. I remember we went and had coffee, and they were saying as soon as we got tickets to London, they were going to come join. They were going to fly to England and be part of our band. But like about a week after they got back, Brian called Levi and said he didn't want to do it. He wanted to do it with his own band. And at the time, his reasoning was Levi don't let him sing one song, and he really'd rather be the singer in the band. So we get over there. We're there about 2 months, and I'm on Portobello Road, and I see Brian's walking there, and he goes, "Hey, Danny, Brian." And he's I'm here with my band. I go, "Bloodless Pharaohs?" He's like, "No, I'm here with the Tomcats." And they introduced me to Slim Jim, and they introduced me to Lee. And I remember Slim Jim had cane. And I went, why does this teenage boy have a cane? And I found out later, Jim twisted his ankle. The day they arrived in London, he twisted his ankle. And so for the first week, whatever, he was walking around with a cane. He's 17.
Wow.
Then about 2 weeks later, they became, I don't know what, I don't still know what the problem is with the name, but I do know that Dave Edmunds was in that movie, That'd Be the Day. And him and Ringo, David Essence have a rockabilly band that wear all leather. It's supposed to be based, and they called themselves the Stray Cats in the movie. And all of a sudden, he starts working with the Tomcats, and they become the Stray Cats. Slim Jim says they named it after the Rolling Stones song Stray Cat Blues, but I don't know, it's just a coincidence. Because I've heard that Dave Edmunds said, I was in a movie called That'd Be the Day, and we had a band called the Stray Cats. And I think that was a really cool name.
Yeah. Obviously, you've known Slim Jim for a long time, and then got the chance to play with him again with Headcat. The whole thing about Headcat just kind of blows me away, and I don't know why I feel so blown away by it. But this was a 3-piece that included Slim Jim Phantom from the Stray Cats, but then also Lemmy from Motörhead.
Right.
I'm sure a lot of people must have thought this was a crazy idea until they heard it and realized, how earnest this was, and that, Lemmy was a huge fan of this genre of music.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, how did you get introduced to Lemmy, and what was it like to work with him?
Well, go back. It's like when I said I was into progressive rock and stuff when I was a teenager, it wasn't all music, but I wasn't really into metal unless it was Deep Purple or Led Zeppelin, if you consider them metal. But I didn't know who Motörhead was, but I loved Hawkwind, and that album, Live Space Ritual with Lemmy on bass. That was when I was 13, 14. That was one of my favorite albums. I played it all the time. As a matter of fact, my first band, we covered 2 Hawkwind songs. So when I remember we went to play Dingwalls in Camden, like in 1980, as soon as we arrived in London, it's one of our first shows. I walk in and Lemmy's sitting at the bar at Dingwalls. And I went, wow, that's Lemmy from Hawkwind. That's what I thought. So I went over and introduced myself and told him I was a big fan of Hawkwind. And he says, oh, you play because you play in the band? And I go, yeah. He goes, you're a rockabilly band, right? And I go, yeah. And he goes, well, I love rockabilly. So that was the first time we met him. And every time we were playing in London, he would always show up at our shows. And we even learned that Johnny Guitar Watson song, Motörhead Baby. So if Lemmy was there, we could dedicate Motörhead Baby to him. And the exact same thing happened to Slim Jim. One of the first shows they did at Dingwalls, Lemmy lived in Camden Town. At Dingwalls, Lemmy was there, and they knew who he was. He became friends with them. So then over the years, I'd run into Scrap Bar in New York. I'd run into him at the Rainbow, different places, and we'd always nod and say hi. We weren't best buddies or anything, but we were friendly. We'd say hi, talk a bit. And it wasn't until 1998 that me and Slim Jim got him to come record with us. And the way that happened is before Headcat, me and Slim Jim had 2 bands. We had a band called 13 Cats, which was our little Stray Cats had broken up. Brian had started his orchestra. And by the way, I was really good friends with Brian, and I used to hang out with Brian a lot. And his future wife, Christine Setzer, is one of my best friends. At the time, she was Christine Setzer. I forget her maiden name, but so Slim Jim, we started the super group. Slim Jim, me, Tim Polecat from the Polecats, and Slutty from the Rockats. And we did the 13 Cats, and we did all right. We did all right, but then me, Lee Rocker, and Slim Jim started a band called Swing Cats, which is meant to capitalize on Brian doing swing, but we said instead of doing swing music, we're going to have a horn section, but we were going to do jump blues.
Okay.
And then after 2 albums, Lee got too busy with his solo career, so they asked us to do a tribute to Elvis, and this was me and Slim Jim. So Swing Cats present a tribute to Elvis. So me and Slim Jim would be the on every song, but we got special guests. So one of the things we decided to do a song with Johnny Ramone, who we both knew from New York, and Lemmy, who we both knew. We thought it'd be cool to do 2 Elvis songs with them. So we go in the studio. Remember, Johnny Ramone was him and me were the ones. I was producing it, but Johnny Ramone was the one who told us. I call him up and I go, "What key?" And he goes, "Let's do the same key as the original. What tempos?" And tempos original. So I went in. I put the backing tracks down. Me and Slim Jim had the backing track. Johnny came in and played his guitar to it, and it was Viva Las Vegas and Good Rockin' Tonight. So then Lemmy comes in the studio and he sings Good Rockin' Tonight. He didn't play bass on it. He sang on it. And then we go to do Viva Las Vegas, and Lemmy goes, "It's the wrong key." And I go, "Well, this is the key is the original." Johnny said, and Lemmy goes, "I can't sing this key." And he goes, "Plus it's too slow." And he goes, "Danny, grab a bass." And he grabbed an acoustic guitar. And so we cut All Shook Up, Trying to Get to You. And Lemmy goes, "Oh, that's it." He goes, "Use those two songs and Good Rockin' Tonight." And then he said, "The three of us should start a band." And I said, "We can make that happen." He went, "Yeah, the three of us should do an album." That's how Headcat started. We went to Cleopatra and said, "Lemmy wants to make a rock and roll album of all covers." And of course, they went, "Wow, of course you can do that." And that's how the band started.
Wow. Lemmy's always been one of these, these legendary and simultaneously beloved figures. I mean, you hear these great stories about what an amazing guy he was. What are your recollections of working with him personally? Did he live up to the legend of Lemmy?
Well, we did that first album. It was so funny because we went into, I went into the studio, Headcat Studios, I think it was called. It was on Hollywood, like in one of those houses in Hollywood, right off Melrose, where the guy Phil had a detached garage he converted to studio. They had a good break. We went in there, we had like every day for like 2 weeks. And we'd go in there and we cut the basic tracks. We said, "What songs you would do?" Let me come in with a bottle. At the time, he's drinking Maker's Mark and Coke. So he'd bring in a bottle of Maker's, and the next day it'd be my turn. So we sit there and drink. Let me come in. He'd be joking around. He's always in a good mood in the mornings. He'd be joking, and we'd be drinking. We'd get a little buzz. Then he'd go, "Okay, what are you going to do?" And he could pick up his acoustic, and we'd sit in the control room, and Jim would kind of play sticks on a phone book. And then we go, "Okay, let's cut that one." Then Jim would go into the drum booth, and I'd sit there and play bass beside Lemmy playing acoustic, and we cut everything like that. Then after 4 or 5 days, we had 13 songs, 14 songs, and then Lemmy did the vocals, and he'd come in every morning about noon, and he would drink. Usually about 5 o'clock, he'd start getting grumpy, and so. But he'd work really hard. He put overdubs. He's very serious and had a really good work ethic. He'd spend an hour relaxing so we could all get in a good mood. Then he'd work and he would do like, "Wow, that's a great vocal take, Lemmy." And he'd go, "No, I can do it better." He'd do another one. And he'd do like, he was a very, very hardworking guy.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, he'd start to get frustrated and he'd get grumpy and he'd start yelling at the sound man that he changed the sound in the headphones, and then so Jim would say, "Well, I got to go pick up TJ." That was Jim's son, and him and Fred Eklund were separated and are divorced, and so he was Lemmy's ride. They lived near each other. So Lemmy go, "Okay, I got to go now," and so that's how Jim would go, "Okay, I'll get Lemmy out of here now. He's getting grumpy," and so the whole time it was amazing. You didn't know it. And I remember I had to go down the street somewhere we had to pick up one of the ADATs. We were using ADATs to record. I took it in. I went to dropped it off at the shop, and I said, "Yeah, I'm doing an album down the street." And that was the day that Johnny Ramone came in. We were mixing. I go, "Yeah, I have Johnny Ramone and Lemmy are standing there in that little studio down the street off Melrose." They go, "What?" I go, "Yeah." It was a fun time, but he was always down to earth. Lemmy's one of the most down to earth people I ever met.
Yeah, I've heard that a number of times. That's exactly what they say. Just like one of the most down to earth guys. But it depends on what time of day you get him.
Yeah, and I would hang out with them all day, and we always got first I didn't know we were ever going to play live. It was just an album of cover songs, and then New Year's Eve, 1999, 2000, Slim Jim opened the Cat Club, and I wasn't planning on going out because remember there's all that big fuss about Y2K, and I figured I'm not going to even bother going out. I wasn't really afraid of it, but Jim calls and goes, "Lemmy wants to play at the club tonight." And Jim had never had a band before. He said, "I go, well, how are we going to do it?" He goes, "We're just going to sit up on the floor and play, but we're just going to open the doors, and if people walk by, they can come in." So I went down, and so New Year's 1999, 2000, me and Lemmy and Slim Jim played, and Lemmy played guitar. I got my friend John Carlucci from Fuzztone, he's now a DJ on Underground Garage.
Yep.
Pete John. So and he'd been a friend of mine from New York, so I got him to play bass. So we did our first gig on New Year's Eve, 1999. And then it's like another year later, we did another gig somewhere. I think we did a cat club gig. Then we got asked to do a festival in Green Bay. And then Lemmy decided whenever he was off the road, he would book he wanted Jim to book shows because he liked doing rock and roll songs. And so we went from doing one show every 2 years, one show a year, 2 shows a year, 4 shows a year, till we got up to like did a little tour the last tour we did before Lemmy started getting sick, and we maybe did 25 shows.
Wow.
I never thought we would ever like be a real band. I thought it was just like a project me and Jim were doing on the side, you know what I mean?
So I have to ask you, I mean, here you are, a guy who's been playing rock and roll for forever, virtually your entire career, whether it's rockabilly, early rock and roll, however you want to define it. And then all of a sudden you find yourself married to the niece of Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yeah.
Annie Marie Lewis. I've seen a couple of your videos of you guys, performing together. Tell me about your relationship with Annie.
Well, what happened is Headcat opened for Jerry Lee 2011. Maybe it was 2010, but it was Jerry Lee's 75th birthday party. We opened for him, and I had got to know Phoebe, his daughter, and at the time Phoebe was his manager. Phoebe was the daughter of Myra and Jerry Lee, the oldest daughter he had. I mean, he had Jerry Lee Jr., but Jerry Lee had died. But Phoebe was his oldest, like his sibling. His oldest child. And so her and me became friends because she bought this magazine called Twisted South that my friend was running, and I had gone out and done some promotion for it at Barnes and Nobles. And so we went to do the gig. I remember Slim Jim actually played drums with Jerry Lee before, but at that point Jerry Lee had become really like inclusive. He wouldn't talk to anyone. And I remember, so I got on stage. Reverend Horn, he called me out. We played our set. Reverend Horn, he got on stage. They called me out to jam with them. I get off stage, and Slim Jim and Phoebe and Lemmy are standing there by the side of the stage. And Phoebe goes, "Hey, Daddy, you want to go meet my daddy?" I go, "Yeah, I'll do it." And so she took us upstairs, and she goes, "Daddy, this is my friend Danny. This is Lemmy from Motörhead. This is Slim Jim from Stray Cats. They opened for you." I shook his hand. The funniest thing is when Lemmy shook his hand, he whispered in my ear. Lemmy goes, "It's the fucking killer." And he kept shaking his hand. "It's the fucking killer." And then we took all these pictures, and Jerry Lee is going, "No more pictures." And Phoebe's going, "Yes, Daddy, you're taking pictures." And I remember Lemmy goes, "Maybe we should leave him alone, Dan." I go, "It seems like she's in charge." And she's going, "Dad, you're going to sit there and take pictures." There's some pictures where he's frowning, and there's some pictures where he's smiling. And that was my meeting. So fast forward like 3-4 months, they're playing Viva Las Vegas, and I go there every year, but I never really got the wristbands. I just go there, hang out, and and see all the people come, my friends and stuff. And this person I was with, they said, "Can you get us in to see Jerry Lee on the car show?" So I texted Phoebe, and I said, "Can I get in to see your daddy?" And she said, "Yeah, go meet JW Witten." That was his road manager. So I met him at the back, right there at the car show. I don't know if you've ever been to Viva Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And he gave me wristbands, full like wristbands, like not just backstage passes. So I went up there, and they put me on the side of the stage. What's funny is the Lost Straight Jackets and the Blasters that opened for him. Then the security came and said everyone had to get out of the backstage area. So I was talking to Bill Bateman, and they kicked him out. And they go to me, they go, "You have to get out." I go, "No, I'm Jerry Lee. I don't have to leave." And Tom Ingram goes, "But he's good." So I go up on the side of the stage, and Annie Marie opened the show and Linda Gale, they opened the show for Jerry Lee. So I texted Phoebe while I was on the stage. I go, "Who is that girl opening for your daddy?" And she goes, "That's my skinny cousin. You want to meet her?" I go, "Yeah." And so long story, she contacted Annie. Annie, that we didn't meet that day. When he got done playing, I just went back up to the casino. But she got in touch with me like the next day, or she texted me. And we texted for like almost 2 years before we could have our first date. And
wow.
Since our first date, we've been together. So
that's awesome.
And that's funny. When this show was over, Eddie Angel comes back and goes, "How come you didn't get kicked out of the backstage?" And I go, "Because I'm with Jerry Lee. I'm not with the Blasters or the Lost Straight Jackets."
Good thinking. Good quick thinking.
And I went to Bill Bateman. I go, wow, that girl is cute. Did you see that singer? And Bill's like, yeah. I go, she was cute. I mean, his daughter is going to hook me up with her. Let's arrange a meetup.
Danny, this has been a lot of fun. I'm glad we were able to get this worked out. Like I said, it's an amazing story to see what you've gone through, who you've worked with, and the fact that you've kept this music alive. Again, I've never seen rockabilly or rock and roll have revivals. To me, it's always been about survival, and that's really always been the bottom line.
Yeah, I've been lucky to be. And before that, tell you one of the funniest stories of my life is I became Nancy Sinatra's guitarist, like about 2002, maybe 2003. I became her guitarist, and I had a show. She was going to play for the. They do it every year for Memorial Day. They do this big. They do the thunder. The thunder stop. The thunder. It's where all the bikers come out, the veterans, and they go down and they drive there in the mall by the Washington Monument. But I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it. It's a really good thing. And Nancy always is involved in it. So we were going to play there at the mall in front of Lincoln Memorial, like facing the Washington Memorial. And I also had a show with Lemmy like 2 days before. So I went down. Headcat, we rehearsed in small places. We rehearsed at the studio called Cole Studios, and we did a Born in the USA. We covered that, and we actually recorded the thing. So Nancy normally would get a big sound stage. So I told her management that she's doing this show and she's doing a benefit, help these veterans, that we should go to a cheaper rehearsal studio instead of her getting a big sound stage. So she went and we rehearsed in the same room as Headcat. And she said, I want to do Born in the USA for all the soldiers. She goes, does anyone have the lyrics? And I go, well, I have a recording of Headcat doing it yesterday. So Nancy went over there with her manager and she listened to some of those little like discs they used to have. And she's trying to write down the words that Lemmy's singing. And the bass player turned to me and he goes, there's not too many people that can say they played the same song, the same studio with Lemmy on one day and the next day with Nancy Sinatra. I was like, wow, that's pretty weird. It is a weird life I have.
Yeah, I think you might just be the only one, Danny.
That was funny. Then we did the show Lemmy. The next morning, I got up and I flew to Washington, and I did that show in the mall with Nancy Sinatra. And also, it's funny, she's also very down to earth. I've eaten at McDonald's with her. She would go to McDonald's with us. She was also just down to earth as Lemmy. She was real, and she was really amazing. Because I remember we did the Bumper Shoot Festival. We've been rehearsing in this soundstage. She had catered the rehearsals, everything. We had a horn section, and I went down to the lobby and we were playing up there in Seattle, and she's sitting there. I go down early to the lobby, wait for the van. She's sitting there and she's signing autographs. I go to her. I go, so you waiting for your car? And she goes like, I'm in the van, aren't I? Can't I get in the van with you? And I went, well, of course. So now that the van came, her and her boyfriend Cole, they climbed into the back seat of the van, and we all loaded in and went over to the gig. And then we did a whole tour of Europe with a tour bus where she was in the bus with us. She was really down to earth. She was just down to earth as Lemmy. I mean, both of them were just like real people. And you think, wow, that's Frank Sinatra's daughter, and that's Lemmy from Motörhead. You expect both of them to be, your image of who they are would be a lot different than how great they were in person.
I was going to say, it's kind of hard to imagine her dad getting in the backseat of the van. That I would not have imagined.
Well, funny, we played in Texas, right in a place called Lockhart, which is a barbecue camp. We did a Habitat for Humanity benefit, but we had to back up Frank Sinatra Jr. and then play at Nancy. And afterwards, we went back to one of his ex-wife lives here, and we went back to her house and had dinner. And I'm sitting at the table with her and Frank Jr. and this guy, this older comedian that used to open for Frank Sinatra, but now he opened for Frank Jr. Frank Jr. was doing his dad's orchestra and stuff.
Right.
So they're sitting there and they start talking about their childhood. I remember Nancy going, you remember I used to listen to the radio up there, and Dad would come up there and he'd take the transistor radio out. I'd be listening to it in bed. He'd take it away from me because you can't listen to my phone. And Frank Jr. said, well, they woke me up, him and Ernie Kovacs and Dean Martin. They woke me up one morning and told me to go get a pizza. And I go, well, Dad, the pizza place is closed. So Dad gets on the phone and calls up someone and says, they're opening the pizza place. Go pick pizza. He said, so I drove, got the pizza, came back. My dad and Dean Martin had left. My dad was asleep. and Ernie Kovacs is there in his underwear, like just waiting for the pizza. And while they're telling these stories, I'm like going. I looked at the comedian who's like twice my age. I go, they're talking about Frank Sinatra. Dad used to be me. His dad was meaner to me than he was to you. He made me. They're talking about their dad, who's like Frank Sinatra. It's like as just normal kids do. You know what I mean?
That's great, Danny. I appreciate this so much. It's great to talk to you. Hopefully, down the road we can do this again.
Cool, man. Sounds great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
You're welcome, man.
The name of Danny B. Harvey's new band is called No Class. Keep your eyes open. They're coming out in March. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can reach me at Bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Metro, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support, but most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.